So as Raymond said, my name is Brenda Neer. I'm the new president of East Gwillimbury Gardeners. I'll just tell you a little bit about our gardening club. Under normal circumstances, we meet on the third Tuesday of the month, February to November, in Mount Albert. We typically have a speaker and treats and a flower show, and it's all lots of fun. Meetings are open and free to the public. Everyone's welcome. And they're a great way to learn and meet other gardeners. But since our meetings are obviously curtailed at this time, I really want to thank the East Gwillimbury Library and Stephanie Clare and Raymond for reaching out to us and helping us create this presentation today. It's great to still be able to get some information out to the public. So I'm just going to introduce our speakers, our presenters tonight. Our main speaker, Helene Robert, is an East Gwillimbury board member. She's down at the bottom of your screen there. Hi, Helene. Helene has been growing vegetables for over 20 years, although she doesn't look old enough for that. But anyway, even as a young child, she was bearing potatoes, apparently, in her mother's flower beds. She has grown vegetables in containers, community gardens, and even in challenging situations like full shade. Helene is a member of Lake Simcoe South Master Gardeners and is working on her horticultural certificate at Guelph University. She's crazy about tomatoes, and Helene has turned her small backyard into a vegetable oasis and is able to grow enough produce to preserve, can, and pickle in the fall. And in her spare time, she's a high school teacher. So adding in our 2 cents worth throughout Helene's talk will be Anne Hill and myself. Say hello, Anne. I don't know, you've disappeared from my screen, but I'm sure you're there. So Anne Hill is the past president of East Gwillimbury Gardeners, and she's been gardening for many years, but says she's still learning all the time. She mostly grows vegetables, but successfully, or mostly grows flowers, but successfully grows vegetables. And is particularly gardening with nature for the soil and providing habitat for pollinators. As for myself, I too have gardened for numerous years, predominantly in flowers, but I've kind of learned vegetable gardening through osmosis from my husband because he's a very keen vegetable gardener. I'm very interested in native plants and native bees. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Helene, and she's going to take us through our PowerPoint. I hope you enjoy our presentation.
Okay, thank you, Brenda. Hello, everyone. Let me just present my screen. Okay, is that good?
Perfect.
It's coming up. Yep.
All right. Okay, so let's talk vegetables. First of all, you don't need a big yard. There's a lot of very creative ways where you can build your own planters, reuse certain materials you have around the house. As you can see on the left, these are pictures of, it's not my balcony, but I've been doing some gardening on balcony and in containers. And you can actually grow a very good amount of food in those containers, providing that they have the depth that is of quality to the vegetables you'll put in. To the right, you can see my small yard there. That's my first year garden bed. It's been expanding every single season, and it's amazing actually the amount of food you can grow even in a small yard. So the first step, this is for beginner gardeners. So the very first step would be to either find seeds or seedling. As you heard in the news, you can now do some curbside pickups in most of our garden centers. You can also maybe reach to your neighbors or friends that are gardeners, because we usually are saving seeds as well at the end of the season. So either way, seeds or seedlings are excellent to start a garden. Once you have, let's say, a packet of seeds like this, you can see at the bottom left of the package here that you have some very, very important information. So that's something you really have to read in order to have success this summer. So you could see here, for example, with those snap peas, that you have certain spacing to respect, that you shouldn't be thinning them, and we'll go through that later. And you can see also written on the information that you can direct sow them in the ground as soon as the ground can be worked. So as soon as it's thawed a little bit. If you're going to buy seedlings or plants, it's important to really observe the plants as much as possible. I know we're in special conditions this year, but what you want to look for is probably a foliage that looks like it's a very good green uniform, that the leaves look healthy, so no discoloration, no different colors in the veins of the leaf. You want to have thick stems, and those characteristics will differ depending on what vegetables you're looking to buy, of course. At the bottom right, you could see onion seedlings. Some of the vegetables we plant, like carrots and onions, will come in those containers where you need to separate them. So like here, maybe a new beginner gardener could be tempted to just plant the whole plug pack as it is, but you actually need to tear them apart, one from the other. Um, Okay, when to start seeding the different seeds you have? Well, first of all, look on the internet or on the package to make sure that it's the right time. Um, some of them, uh, some of them should have been started a long time ago, like peppers or tomatoes, but there's still time to plant some seeds in the house and directly outside in your garden as well. So once you find out that you need to start them, you can see here on the pictures different options that you have. The bottom left being peat moss pellets. You just soak them in water and they expand, and there's no nutrients in that soil, but it's very good as a starter soil. And then you can transplant them in something that has more nutrition. You can see at the bottom right, egg cartons here that can be used. Some people even use eggshells or containers from the recycling bin. This is just a small list of what can be grown at this time of year outdoors directly or started indoors. So you'll see that some vegetables are missing to the list, obviously, because there's actually way more than that that can be direct sown outdoors or started indoors. But those, I would say, are the main ones, the usual ones. One word of caution is if you started, let's say, some onions or peas or celeries indoor, you will need to harden them before you plant them outdoors. So let's say you have something that has been used to the house's temperature, the absence of wind, no direct sunlight, and you put it outside, just planting right in the garden like that, there's good chance that it will go into transplant shock, and that could actually kill the seedling. So you got to make sure, and we'll go through the steps together later. You have to make sure that you acclimate them little by little. If you choose to start the seedlings indoors, there's a lot of fancy different light options that are out there. Delivery being what they are this season, my recommendation would be to start them and put them, if possible, close to your southern facing window or east facing window or west, just not north. If you can't really access a window like that would provide sun, it's okay to start them in the soil, and then during the day place them outside, let's say on your balcony or on your deck or somewhere outside in the sun, and then take them indoors as soon as you see the temperature going below 5 degrees Celsius. So if you don't have lights, it's okay to start, let's say, cucumbers at this time of year. But what you want to do is put them outside so that they get the sunlight, bring them indoors for the evening when it starts to get chilly. Uh, I wrote a little something about watering here too. You want to make sure that the soil stays moist, but you don't want to be really drenched or soggy because eventually you could develop some root rot problems with that or fungus problems. So the best thing is to let it dry a little bit. Look, you have to make sure that it's moist, but let it dry a little bit between the waterings. Thinning. So some plants have very small seeds. For example, you have here carrots. So the carrot seeds are difficult to plant at a certain distance one from another because they're so small. So what we will do in these conditions sometimes is thinning, and certain seed packets will refer to that. So thinning could be done by pulling on the plant, but pulling on the plant can be dangerous because there's a small chance that you will break the roots of other seedlings that are beside the ones that you want to remove. So a very safe way would be with scissors. So by using scissors, you make sure that you're not disturbing the soil, but that you remove the seeds that are extra. So when to plant outdoors, we have some cool crops that can be planted outdoors when it's cold, like peas and onions, and some that are actually would taste better grown in a cold weather. But some of them aren't. So our tender crops like tomatoes, cucumbers, beans, will need to be planted outdoors when you have after your last frost date. So you have here a link, planthardiness.gc.ca, that will take you to this map and where you can explore exactly, depending on where you live, what your hardiness zone is. This is not 100% reliable though. So you got to take in consideration that every year we will see seasonal variations. So you can have a frost at the end of May where it's not usually expected. So the first thing would be really to check your local weather. If you were to plant your tomatoes outside too early, and let's say you get caught with a surprise frost, my best advice for you is watering the ground, because if the soil is watered, the changes in temperature won't go as fast as if it were to be in a dry soil. So water them, and if you could cover them with anything like a plastic tarp or anything you have really on hand, it should be okay. But depending on the situation, I always recommend to be very cautious before you actually transplant your plants. Hardening the seedlings. So to harden the seedlings means that if you have, let's say you bought some tomato plants at a greenhouse or you grew them in your house, you want to put them outside for a certain amount of time that will be longer and longer every day. So I would start probably by putting them outside for an hour in the shade. I wouldn't put them directly in the sun. What the plants are going to do during that period where they're outside is they will transform their leaves a little bit. So there are wax coatings on the leaves, and those will develop more by going outside. The leaf will thicken. It will adapt to the conditions gradually. You can see here different tips that I wrote for you about transplant shock. So the pictures you see are plants that are planted outside. It's normal to have a certain amount of transplant shock, but if it's too much for them, then you won't be able to rescue them. So usually we would do the hardening, let's say probably at least a week to 2 weeks in length, and the nights being probably the more dangerous period. So taking them inside during the night at the end, and you just gradually go, let's say, from 2 hours to spending pretty much the whole day outside. So the best time to plant your seedlings, your precious seedlings, would be probably in the evening because there's no harsh sunlight. Same thing, cloudy day, because then you're avoiding the direct sunlight that could be too difficult for them for the whole day. Mild temperature, watering the the soil and watering the seedlings is also good. Anytime you transplant a plant, you should water them. The watering for vegetables should be done directly at ground level. It can be risky if you're watering from the top down. So what will happen then is you will have wet leaves, and the wet leaves can develop fungus eventually. If you plant your plants very close one to another, that's even more. That's something that even more that might happen. And be gentle, yeah, with the roots. So the roots are the most tender part, depending on the plant. But let's say for green beans or peas, some of them the packets will say to sow directly in the ground because of the roots that are so tender. How to plant and water. So I touched already on the watering. The watering should be the best watering practice, watering at ground level. There's many different gadgets that exist to do some throughout the day, but I would say the best practice is to check your soil. So if you want to be watering in an environmental way and an effective way, you want to make sure that the soil is dry, let's say an inch or two below ground surface. Then that's the right time to water. If you have tomatoes, as you can see on the picture there on the top left of the screen, you want to plant them deep. So what you do is you remove the bottom leaves, and then you plant them either the A or the B fashion. And by planting them deeper like that and watering them efficiently, so not just every day or every other day on a schedule, but by checking the actual soil, what you're going to do is you're going to have tomatoes that grow deeper roots, and they will be able to survive more on their own between watering. If you water them every day superficially, so let's say you don't put a lot of water, but you put it every day to the plant, the roots are going to develop at the surface. And when let's say a heat wave comes in August, those plants are going to suffer way more than the other ones who have the deep roots. And for usually, I would say that apart from tomatoes, the planting is pretty straightforward. So what you want to do is have the root crown covered by soil, and that should be sufficient. The onions, as you can see on the lower left image, will grow a bulb that is actually sticking out of the ground. That's perfectly normal. For potatoes, if you're growing potatoes, we recommend that you hill them. So what you want to do is pull the soil and make a little mound around the potato plant. That way, because what we're eating is actually the tubers that are in the ground, well, you're gonna have more room to have those tubers grow a little bit bigger. If you weren't gonna hill the potatoes, the problem is that probably the top potatoes that you have will start to turn green a little bit, and those shouldn't be eaten. How to plan your garden. So this is a tough one. It's because we do a lot of impulse buying often, but planning will probably give you the best yield. First of all, don't be discouraged if you don't have a lot of sunlight. You might not be able to have the amount of vegetables that someone would have in full light, but there's still a lot of things that can be grown. For optimal conditions, you would need probably 8 hours or more. The more sunlight, the best. I grew vegetables in yards that really didn't have a lot of direct sunlight. Probably some spots didn't have any sunlight, but I was able to grow vegetables as well. Just really not as I would have, let's say, if I would have an open yard. You can see a trellis on one side of the garden. What I would do is place that trellis on the north side. That way, the vegetables that are taller won't be putting shade on the other vegetables that are in front of them. So here, what you want to do is check the height of the plant. looking at the packet or on the tag that comes with the seedling. And because every variety is different. There are tomato plants that are monsters, that are huge, and others that are miniatures. So, and same thing for peppers, same thing for a lot of different veggies. So you want to make sure to check the exact variety you bought or you grew and plan according to the heights of the plants. I wrote here 4 feet wide. 4 feet wide is considered to be the optimal width of a garden bed because that way you don't need to step in the garden bed. This is relative to, I guess, to your height, but this is usually the optimal width for the garden. So 4 feet by, let's say, 8 feet or 4 by 4 or etc. If you have the opportunity to grow a garden every year, it's a good idea to do a crop rotation. So there's a chance, depending on how many of the same plant you grow, there's a chance that it's going to foster some pests either in the soil or around. So if you can, let's say, rotate your cucumbers in the yard, maybe having even different garden beds, if you have a big yard, that would be the ideal condition. If it's not possible, I mean, you might have pests, but you might not have them as well, or there's always ways to deal with pests. And maybe we can touch on that on our next webinar. Square foot gardening is a very effective way of gardening if you want to have the most with the smallest space. This is what you want to do. So as you see on the little image there on the drawing, we've separated the garden. It's divided in square feet, and you have a certain amount of plant you can have in each of these squares. So this is something you can research if you're interested. Some people will even leave little indicators of the square feet in their garden as the veggies grow. You can do some staggering. So if you're not interested in having 150 carrots growing at the same time, you can plant them every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, and that way have them growing throughout the whole season. This is a picture of my garden. I grow a lot of tomatoes. They are probably too close to be. I hesitated to put the picture in the presentation because it might not be the best thing for pests, but I'm ready to compromise and have some pests and deal with them because I want all these different varieties. So this is what you would see in a square foot gardening tomato garden. At the left, you can see as well here my different vegetables growing. So I don't divide in exact squares, but I do relatively the idea of square foot gardening. Some plants will be taller or wider than you thought they would, but you can always adjust. So it's not an exact science. And we learn through mistakes every single seasons. We try new things. Some things works, some things will work, something won't. But it's always a learning process, and it's also part of the fun, I think. So you gotta not take it too seriously, in my idea. If you're interested, there are also fruit trees and shrubs that will fit in smaller spaces. So, for example, any dwarf varieties like the dwarf cherry you see at the left, blueberries, raspberries, all types of berries can grow if you have enough sun. There are also some very funky varieties of trees like the columnar ones. Here you can see columnar apple trees. They can fit in a super small space. Only thing is for lots of fruit trees, you would need more than one in order for pollination to occur properly. So that you need to do a little bit of research before you go and buy the fruit trees. Okay, container gardening. We've had a lot of questions lately about containers. So container is a really good, really good type of gardening for beginners. It's less intimidating, and you can actually work with pretty much any space you have, whether it's big or small. This is a container that I built myself out of pine wood. You can see I put a trellis on top of it. So what you see here is butternut squash and different types of beans. Other types of containers, and the internet is full of different types of containers. If you're looking for ideas, you could see at the left there we have plastic buckets. Those should have holes, drainage holes at the bottom. We can't see them, but I'm sure there are. At the right, you could see actually in those pails that they have drilled some holes. That's really essential because when you have a downpour, depending if it's in a covered area on a balcony or if it's in the yard, you might end up with some problems. You can see fabric ones as well. The fabric ones are really easy to store, and they're light. They can be moved very easily. You have to be cautious though, because if they're black like that, there's a good chance, and it's a very porous material, there's a good chance that it's going to get warmer in the sun, and also that they will dry quicker. So they're still very good to have around the house. I would just make sure that they're not actually cooking the roots or drying up too quickly. So I would maybe check them a little bit more than the other ones, or maybe check if I could have something in front of them that is smaller to maybe get a little bit of that done. There's a lot of information about gardening on the internet. Good ones, bad ones, lots of different advices. If you're looking for something that's very reliable, I would advise you to always put extension at the end of your gardening research. So extensions are university extensions that work with farmers or gardeners, and it's actually science and research based. So that is really, really good advice that you could get that way. So you can see here on this screen that different plants can be grown in containers. You should really check the type of plant to make sure that the container fits the plant. Some of the plants can be special in their variety. So let's say for tomatoes, you can see you have a 5-gallon pot here for tomatoes. That's the ideal, because some of the tomatoes will grow maybe 7 or 8 feet tall. So you will need a lot of nutrients and lots of space root to host them. But you have very small varieties that actually would do well in smaller containers than that. So that's the ideal. But some containers can be smaller, and you can still grow the vegetables. They might not be at their maximum yield, but they can still give you a lot of lots of veggies. These are just ideas of themed planters. So if you're not sure what should be in a planter, you can maybe think of one of your favorite recipes in the summer and just organize different types of plant you would eat together, like a pizza planter or a salad planter maybe. Oh, companion plants. Some plants do very well together. So some plants will complement each other and grow actually better when you place them one beside the other. Some plants will do the opposite. So if you were, let's say, to plant cucumbers and potatoes one beside the other, you probably will have potatoes, but you probably won't have any cucumbers. So there's good companions and bad ones. Lots of charts on the internet. So maybe just take notes of that expression, companion planting, and just make sure by researching that you're doing the right match when you're drawing your plan. So the more sensitive plants are potatoes. Some people, some neighbors don't like the potatoes. Herbs also, like dill, onions also. Most of them are fine though, but just you don't want to have bad news when things should be growing and they aren't. Okay, soil is a difficult one because it can be so different depending on your conditions. If you are doing a raised bed, probably triple mix is the right option for you. A triple mix is a soil that has been mixed with compost, so you will have nutrients in it. If you're doing a container, for containers, it can be better to have something that have more drainage. So something like a potting mix is good. If you have your own soil and you want to just plant in the ground, then it really depends on what you are working with. If it's a very clay-based soil, you could want to add sand. If it's a very sandy soil, then you would want to add more organic material and clay. So this one it will need more research if you want to amend your soil at home. Weeds and grass. So if you are starting completely new this season, there's a no-dig method. This is a picture of a YouTube channel that I really like, Charles Dowding. He's an English vegetable gardener. He's having a lot of success with this no-dig method. What you can see on the picture is actually part of his yard that was infested with, I think it's dog-strangling vine or anyways, a terrible weed. So what he does is he lays cardboards and you make sure that they overlap. So you don't want to have openings between the cardboards that are really the plain brown ones. So ideally, no ink or no plastic on it. And you want to put some soil on top of it, a couple of inches, and you can directly plant in these garden beds afterward. Mulch is a good idea if you don't like weeding. It has a lot of it have a lot of plus. So there's less watering if you mulch. There's really a lot of different types, as you can see in this image. The only one that I would maybe not put in a vegetable garden is the wood chips that have been dyed, you know, like the red wood chips or the black wood chips, because the chemicals they use to dye the wood will actually leach in time in your soil. So, but it's not dramatic if you have put that already. But I would maybe advise for next time to look at another alternative. Each type of mulch has their plus and their their benefits and their negative side. Um, Straw is a good option. Some people will even put newspaper, plastics, grass clipping. So there's lots of options for you out there. Okay, garden tools. You can see on the left that there's a lot of different special tools that are out there for sale. You actually don't need all those tools. As long as you have gloves and a shovel, you're good to go. It's as easy as that. Some veggies will have prickly stems or will have chemicals growing to protect them from herbivores. So let's say, for example, tomatoes will have that, or lots of different squash will have very prickly stems. So gloves, I think, are a good idea. If you have allergies or sensitivities, maybe even more so. There's lots of options for trellises as well. If you're thinking of growing peas, beans, squash, what else? There's lots of plants that will need that vertical space to grow if you don't have a very large horizontal space. Um, you can see here all types of different options that aren't expensive ones. It can be something made with branches and sticks that you have around the yard. You can see cages for tomatoes or stakes for tomatoes. You can use fabric to, you know, tie them up at every level like that. And we're with Brenda, pollinator.
Yeah. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about leaving room for the bees in your garden. I have a particular interest in native bees. I've been trying to learn some of the different families of bees, but there's over 300 species of native bees in just Ontario alone, the GTA area. It's pretty amazing. We tend to just think of bumblebees and honeybees, but there's, you know, there's so many different species out there. And actually, the more species that visit the flower of your vegetables, the better the pollination and the better your produce. So if they're just pollinated by a single type of bee, you will get produce, but if that flower is pollinated and visited by multiple types of bees, different species, they've actually measured and shown that that plant will produce a better yield. You know, your melons will be larger, that kind of thing. And our native bees actually pollinate better than honeybees. So it's good to invite them into your yard. And how do you do that? One of the good ways to do that would be to create like a bee pollinator corridor around or through your garden. So, and including some native plant species, or even just any kind of flowers that will help bring in the bees. And the other thing is leaving some bare areas in the ground, because most of our native bees, 70% of them actually nest in the ground. And so they don't travel as far. Honeybees travel a long way, but all our little native bees, most of them, some of them only travel 500 meters at the most from their nest. So if you can have the nesting in their close to your vegetables, then you're going to get more bees to your vegetables. And the flowers that you want to plant, this slide speaking to the fact that an open landing pad is better. The Peony is a beautiful plant. That's the one on the left. But it's so dense that bees can't even get into it. Whereas your cosmos on the right is a nice big open area for bees and butterflies to land on and access the nectar. I think Anne wanted to add something in on this as well.
You've covered one of them, which was that we need a lot of bees or other pollinators, different ones to reach the plants to produce better produce, especially if you can grow some native plants. They have developed along with the bees, and some of the plants have grown up with the bees so that they are shaped to suit the bee, so that the bee has a particular tongue, if you like, and that suits the particular plants. So that's why one good reason why we really want a lot of native plants, to encourage the native bees as well. And I think that's what I wanted to say about the bees. I know you covered most of it, but let's hear it for the native plants.
Yeah.
Okay, and here's just an example to show you that you can mix edible and ornamental plants. So these are hostas growing next to strawberries and a beautiful pink flamingo. So don't be afraid to mix them up like that. It will make for a more effective pollination. The plants that usually suffer from lack of pollinations are the squash and the cucumbers. So if you see you have like half a cucumber growing, the other part is staying like a little pickled cucumber, that's because it wasn't properly pollinated. And same thing for little zucchinis that you'll be very excited to finally have a zucchini growing, but then it just turns yellow and all mushy. That's because it wasn't properly pollinated. So yes, native plants, very effective.
Yes, yes. I have been really intrigued by something called phenology. It comes from the same word as phenomenon. It's from a Greek word. And if you notice, the things that happen in the garden follow a certain sequence every year. First, you'll see some crocuses probably. You'll see some dandelions, and you'll see forsythia blooming, and eventually the lilacs. Those things happen according to the temperature of the soil and the things that are happening in nature. If we follow those same kind of cues, we can pick up on the right times to plant some things. For instance, when the crocuses are blooming, it's time to plant radishes and spinach and parsnips, which you may not grow. When the forsythia is in bloom, it's safe to plant peas and onion sets and lettuce. It's today I've seen dandelions. I think that's the first day I've seen dandelions. So now you can plant potatoes. Once you see dandelions, it's warm enough to grow potatoes. I don't know quite how nature deals with the fact that we're supposed to have snow this weekend, but your potatoes would be well buried. This man who's sitting on his bait bucket, it's too soon to plant. There's an old saying that when the fisherman is sitting on the bank instead of sitting on the bait bucket, it's safe to plant onions. So these are interesting little cues that you can follow throughout the year. You can find them on the internet. Wait for apple trees to bloom before planting bush beans, they say. By the time everything has gone through its sequence and the lilacs are in full bloom, it's safe to plant your annual plants outside. So that's really cool stuff, I think. And it would work with climate change because the crocuses are going to come at a slightly different time. You can still follow when they're growing to plant your radishes and your parsnips and your spinach. Okay. Back to you, Ellen.
Thank you, Anne. So we're pretty much done here. This is just a reminder that we haven't touched much of the harvesting. So when is something ready to get harvested, or how to collect some seeds? But we'd like to have some workshops, some webinars on that later during the season, because it's easy to, let's say, wait too much and have that really yellow, plenty of seed in the cucumber, and it's no good to eat. Or taking the garlic too early from the garden and not having any bulbs really to preserve. And know that there's very easy ways to collect seeds for yourself for next year. If you look it online, or if you want to participate to a next webinar that we'll have in the future, we will be talking about it. But beans and peas are among the easiest to preserve. You just let's say if you discover that you've forgotten about that little seed pods of beans at the bottom of the vine. You just let it dry there for the whole summer, and then you collect it when it's 100% dry, and you have your seeds for next year. And it's completely free, and you can share with the neighbors. So it's very easy to collect most of the seeds from our vegetables. You just need to know how to go around about it. And I think that's it for us for the presentation. I've put an image at the lower right of what we do in horticultural societies. We have championships, so it's not running really this summer unless something very dramatically changes in the next week. But if you want to join your local horticultural society, we actually have ribbons of winners of different categories of vegetables and fruits. So it's very exciting for gardeners. You get to compete against your neighbors or fellow gardeners. And if you're looking for more advice or information about the Horticultural Society, you have our website right here. If you look online for Ontario Horticultural Association, their website is, I think, gardenontario.org, something like that. They're also on Facebook. And there are associations all throughout Ontario, and it's all great friendships, great snacks usually, and we learn about speakers, and we learn about all types of different subjects.
Excellent.
And that's it for me.
Okay. Thanks, Helene. And I just want to thank everyone for participating, and thanks the library again for facilitating this presentation. And now I think we're going to have some Q&A. I see there was a lot of questions coming up throughout, so I think Raymond's going to facilitate that.
Yeah, lots of a discussion generated. So, and again, from me and the library, thank you, Elaine, thank you, Brenda, and thank you, Anne, for joining us. So I do see right here just one of the earlier questions from Deborah. It says, even with the prediction for a little snow this weekend, is it still okay to sow the seeds that Elaine mentioned earlier at the beginning?
Yes, completely. The only thing that's going to happen is the seed will need a certain temperature in the soil to get growing, but it's not going to hurt it. So the seeds that were displayed earlier on the screen, they're all hardy to a light frost. I don't know if you're in Northern Ontario and it's supposed to be -15, that would be a different thing. But if it's just something around 0, it's absolutely not a problem. I've had the peas in the ground since April, so the early April, end of March, and they're fine.
Well, you wouldn't want to
Thank you, Elaine.
You wouldn't want to do beans yet. Beans are
No,
more.
no, not yet. No,
Yeah, no.
not yet.
No beans, no cucumbers,
Gotta wait
no
for the apple
squash.
trees.
Yeah, no tomatoes.
Oh, and just another question from Deborah. Oh, sorry, not Deborah, Donna. I think her question was, what's the best way to keep animals out of the garden? Now we've opened that up to either of you.
I'd like to know that too. I have a wasted rabbit that's eating everything.
Yeah, it's a very difficult one. I would say plant for you and the other animals is probably the best. The only foolproof way is to have a fence. And not even a plastic fence, because the raccoons or the squirrels or the rabbits can actually even go through or chew their way through. So a metal fence is the 100% way not to have them.
Yeah.
If you can do raised beds or containers in an area that's more secluded or higher, that can also help. Some people will say if you put cayenne pepper on them, but then you have to do that every single time it rains or every single time the winds get your cayenne pepper, and you have the risk of be working in the garden, forgetting about the cayenne pepper, and running into some problems. So metal fence.
Yeah, and you have to dig that metal fence in because they'll dig it up and go under. So you want to trench it in really well as well.
Yeah, if you have voles or mice, critters like that, definitely.
Okay. I think we might have time for maybe 2 more questions. One from Wally. What do you recommend for a fertilizer?
Compost. Really good compost. Taking your kitchen scraps and layering it with your brown matter, which could be even just crumpled paper without any dyes, and scraps from the garden, and manure if you have it available. Straw is another good one, and layering that, and you can water it, and creating the heat in there will kill any weed seeds, and then letting that decompose and then getting that into your garden is one of the best fertilizers, because then you're feeding the soil as opposed to feeding the plant.
Okay.
And if you don't have access to a composter and making your own compost, what you can do is buy the fertilizer, like the fertilizer from the store, I would recommend probably vegetable fertilizer, because it's not going to have as much nitrogen as the other components of the fertilizer, and then that's going to be providing more nutrients for the fruits, less for the leaves. When you plant the seedlings are very small. The recipe on the fertilizer can are for a mature plant, so you probably want to water it down and follow the instructions, because they're all different. So it's not like you have one recipe for every fertilizer. And I agree with what Brenda says. I wouldn't put something that has not been very well composted in the garden, because you have a risk of burning the seedlings. So usually for vegetables, we would have manure. We would add manure at the end of the season once we remove everything. So it gets time to be very well composted in the garden for when you plant in the spring. But if you can do your own compost, of course, that would probably be the ideal.
Sounds good. Thank you, Elaine, and thank you, Brenda. Just our final question, I think this one is from Deborah. It says, are there some plants that should not be planted beside each other? I know you talked a bit about companion plants, little plants that work well, but Deborah's interested in what shouldn't be planted together beside each other, if there are any.
Yeah,
Yes, there are. There
not
are
potatoes and
actually,
cucumbers. No.
yeah, that's
Not
one
potatoes and
example.
cucumbers.
Same thing. If you look it up online, there's a whole list of them, but you can still plant them beside probably something else. So onions can be sensitive, can be actually causing problems to the neighbors. Same thing for dill, same thing for potatoes. There's a list of them, so I would recommend you look it up online to make sure. The keyword you want to look at is companion planting. So companion planting, and you'll find there's beneficial planting that would probably be better. If you don't find any information on your plant, then it means that it's probably not a bad nor a good companion. So it's just okay to be sitting next to whatever else.
Okay, so again, I'll just say that any of the questions that we didn't get to, we will be trying to work with the gardeners to answer those and get through them, and we will post the answers on our social media platforms, so keep an eye out for that. And finally, thank you again for Elaine, Brenda, and Anne. But did you have something to add, Brenda?
No, just thank you for joining us. That's great. And I'm glad we're going to be able to work with you and address those questions that didn't get answered.
Absolutely. And thank you for everyone tuning in. It will this session has been recorded and it will be posted on our Facebook page. And as I believe the East Gwillimbury Gardeners do have a YouTube channel as well, and they will be sharing it there too. So thank you everyone for tuning in.